Ryan Lawrence have greatly affected my life. I've been forced against my will out of motherhood. I've been robbed of my livelihood and my most valuable possession. I'm uncomfortable conversing with others about my life experiences due to the past few years revolving around providing the best life I could for Ryan and Maddox. I've lost my home. I've lost my job. I've lost many people I consider.
It was February 20th, 2016. 7:46 p.m., Syracuse, New York. A mother returned home expecting the usual comfort of her daughter's laughter. But that night, her home was quiet. Too quiet. Her husband was gone. Her 21-month-old daughter was gone. And on the table was a note. That single moment would mark the beginning of one of the hardest investigations this city had ever seen. A case that would test every assumption about family, love, and sanity. When I first began covering this story, I thought I was prepared. But nothing could prepare me for what I would learn in the days that followed. This wasn't just a disappearance. It was the unraveling of a mind, one that no one saw coming. As the hours turned into days, search teams moved through snow and water, following fragments of truth that led to an ending no one wanted to believe. Even now, years later, this case remains a weight I still carry. Because what happened to that child should never have happened at all. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe. It helps us continue sharing these stories with honesty and depth. And tell me, where are you watching this from tonight? Thank you for your incredible support. This channel exists because of people like you, viewers who care enough to look deeper. Join our YouTube membership to unlock exclusive cases, extended interviews, and the research that never makes it to air. Now, let's go back to that February evening. The night a mother came home, and everything changed. It was Saturday, February 20th, 2016, in Syracuse, New York. Morgan Lawrence left her home at 10:15 a.m., heading to work, leaving her husband Ryan with their 21-month-old daughter, Maddox. Maddox had recently overcome a rare eye cancer, and for the first time, the family felt hope and relief. That morning seemed ordinary, the kind of day that passes without incident, and no one could have imagined how it would end. Ryan dropped Morgan off at Destiny USA Mall, kissed Maddox goodbye, and promised she'd be waiting when he returned. The house was quiet, scattered with toys, a toddler's blanket left on the couch, dishes from breakfast still on the counter. By early evening, everything appeared unchanged. But at 7:46 p.m., Morgan returned to a home that felt unfamiliar. Ryan was nowhere to be seen, and Maddox was missing. On the kitchen counter lay a note, its content brief but alarming. She immediately called 911. Within minutes, officers arrived. They found the family car abandoned near the mall parking lot, keys inside, personal items untouched. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication of a struggle. Investigators began piecing together the timeline. Ryan had cancelled his phone and wiped digital traces, an action that raised suspicion, but at that point, the focus remained on finding both father and daughter. By 8:30 p.m., the first Amber Alert went out. Syracuse was suddenly on high alert. Neighbors were interviewed. One reported seeing Ryan leave the home that morning carrying a small backpack. Another recalled the child's stroller left inside the house, abandoned. Morgan stayed on the line with dispatch, repeating her daughter's name over and over, sending images from her phone to every available officer. Every passing hour made the possibility of finding Maddox alive feel more uncertain. By the early hours of Sunday, February 21st, police expanded their search. Snow-covered streets, wooded areas near Labrador Hollow Park, and nearby waterways became canvassed zones. Divers suited up for frigid water recovery, and search teams tracked footprints and discarded items that hinted at Ryan's path. Evidence began to suggest a carefully planned disappearance rather than a simple wandering or abduction by strangers. Even with these clues, questions multiplied. Why leave a note? Why abandon the car without personal belongings? What had motivated Ryan to take such drastic action? Investigators noted that Ryan had been intensely involved in Maddox's medical care, spending hours in hospitals and following every treatment. On the surface, he was devoted, a father who had faced the fear of losing his child. But something had shifted in those quiet days after her recovery. Morgan waited at home through the night, unable to sleep. She scrolled through photos of Maddox, each image a reminder of survival and hope. Calls to relatives and friends yielded no answers. Hours felt like days. And somewhere along the snow-dusted roads of Syracuse, Ryan and Maddox were moving, and no one yet knew what was about to unfold. By midday on February 21st, tips began coming in about a man matching Ryan's description trying to board a bus in Baldwinsville, wearing a disguise and carrying a backpack. Authorities mobilized immediately, the city bracing for a breakthrough, while Morgan clung to the last threads of hope. The clock was ticking, the search expanding, and every minute brought them closer to confronting a truth that would shock everyone involved. By early Sunday, February 21, 2016, the search for Ryan and Maddox Lawrence had become the central focus of Syracuse law enforcement. The Amber Alert had triggered dozens of calls from concerned residents, each tip investigated meticulously. Authorities began to track Ryan's movements, tracing the purchases he had made earlier that week, camping gear, food supplies, and clothing items, all seemingly normal, yet in retrospect, forming a troubling pattern. Investigators noted that these items could support extended travel, and the worry was immediate: where had he taken Maddox? At 3:14 a.m., a tip came from a bus terminal in Baldwinsville. A man matching Ryan's description had attempted to board a bus, wearing sunglasses, a wig, and a bulky coat. He carried only a small backpack. Police immediately established a perimeter and deployed units to surrounding roads. Officers working the terminal remembered the man being calm, almost deliberate, and yet something about his demeanor struck them as unusual. By mid-morning, law enforcement narrowed the search to areas surrounding Onondaga Creek and nearby wooded paths. Divers in freezing water, officers combing trails, and K-9 units tracking scents created a coordinated effort. Evidence began to emerge: footprints in the snow, a discarded baseball bat along a trail, and fragments of personal items identified as belonging to Ryan. Investigators began piecing together a timeline that suggested a deliberate attempt to evade capture. At 11:02 a.m., Ryan was spotted walking along a trail near the creek, appearing disoriented but unharmed. Officers approached cautiously, trying to establish communication. Ryan reportedly paused, looked around, and then surrendered without resistance. He was taken into custody immediately, and the first question on everyone's mind was, where was Maddox? Interrogations began almost immediately. Ryan's demeanor was calm but vacant, his words carefully measured. He admitted to taking Maddox with him, claiming he believed he was protecting her from a world he felt had become threatening. Police noted contradictions in his story, inconsistencies that would later be clarified through forensic investigation. At one point, he muttered, "I just wanted her safe," a line that hinted at a distorted sense of morality and protection, even as the consequences of his actions became apparent. By 1:45 p.m., search teams returned to the creek under Ryan's guidance. Divers located Maddox in a black container submerged beneath a thin layer of ice and water. Medical personnel on site confirmed that she was deceased. The weight of the discovery hit the officers and Morgan Lawrence with unbearable intensity. One officer later recalled, "We had trained for years, but nothing prepares you for a child in that condition." The arrest and discovery prompted immediate psychological assessments. Forensic experts noted that Ryan's careful planning, combined with his calm execution and later confession, indicated a complex mental state. He had maintained a public image of devoted fatherhood while privately planning a disappearance with fatal consequences. Investigators collected every trace of evidence, footprints, items, digital records, to ensure the legal case would be airtight. As the sun set over Syracuse that day, investigators faced the grim reality: the search had ended, but justice was just beginning. The city had watched the events unfold over less than 48 hours, and families, neighbors, and authorities alike struggled to comprehend how a parent could commit such acts. The arrest marked the closure of the initial phase of the investigation, yet it opened a deeper, darker chapter that would examine motive, psychology, and accountability. The question remained, what drove Ryan to take Maddox from life to death? After Ryan Lawrence was taken into custody on February 21, 2016, investigators knew that understanding the why behind his actions was critical. He was transported to the Onondaga County Jail under heavy security, and detectives began structured interviews, hoping to uncover the sequence of events that led to Maddox's disappearance and death. Ryan's initial demeanor was calm, almost rehearsed, but moments of hesitation revealed cracks in the carefully constructed narrative he presented. Within hours, he began to provide details, describing in his own words the decisions that led him to take Maddox from the home and to the waterways near Onondaga Creek. According to Ryan, he had felt overwhelmed in the weeks following Maddox's recovery from her cancer, burdened by financial stress, a perceived inability to provide, and a deep personal anxiety he could not manage. Investigators noted that these statements contained elements of rationalization rather than genuine remorse, a classic red flag in forensic psychological evaluation. At 2:30 p.m., Ryan described the sequence of events with unnerving specificity. He admitted preparing the backpack with essential supplies, including food and clothing, and carrying Maddox to a location he later identified as the creek. He confessed that he had placed her in a container in the water, claiming in his words that it was meant as protection, a word that would be repeatedly scrutinized by prosecutors and psychologists alike. His calm, measured speech contrasted sharply with the horror of the actions he recounted, and investigators realized they were dealing with a deeply conflicted mental state, one where distorted logic had overtaken moral reasoning. Detectives recorded every detail, verifying timelines with evidence recovered at the scene. Footprints, digital records, and witness statements all matched the sequence Ryan described. While his confession aligned with physical evidence, forensic teams still needed to confirm the exact moment and manner of Maddox's death. Autopsy results, returned later that week, provided crucial information, showing that Maddox had been deceased prior to immersion, confirming that the act had been intentional rather than accidental. Throughout the interrogation, Ryan repeatedly emphasized that he loved his daughter, and that his actions were meant to shield her from a world he no longer trusted. Psychological experts later analyzed his statements, noting elements consistent with depression, distorted perception, and obsessive thinking. His ability to rationalize the fatal outcome, despite knowing the consequences, reflected a complex moral and cognitive dissonance. The confession drew immediate national attention. Media outlets broadcast portions of the story, interviews with Morgan Lawrence, and statements from police. Public reaction ranged from shock to disbelief, with many struggling to reconcile Ryan's prior image as a devoted father with the reality of his actions. Morgan, devastated yet composed, stated in one interview, he was supposed to protect her. That's what makes this impossible to understand. By the end of the first 48 hours post-arrest, law enforcement had a clear framework for prosecution. Ryan's own words, combined with physical and digital evidence, created a compelling case. But beyond the legal implications, the confession forced a broader reflection on psychological warning signs, parental stress, and the unseen pressures that can escalate to tragic outcomes. The case was far from over. While Ryan had admitted to his actions, the investigation now needed to explore motive, mindset, and the chain of events that led a parent to commit an act so devastating. The next stage would delve deeper into his psychology, examining not just what happened, but why it happened, and how someone's love could transform into a lethal decision. The truth behind Ryan Lawrence's mind would not be easy to confront. And it would change the way Syracuse, and the nation, viewed the fragility of family, trust, and perception. Understanding Ryan Lawrence's actions required more than evidence and timelines. It demanded a deep examination of his mental and emotional state in the weeks leading up to February 20, 2016. Forensic psychologists were called in to assess his behavior, communication patterns, and decision-making. Interviews with family members, neighbors, and co-workers painted a picture of a man under immense stress, yet still meticulous and outwardly composed. Psychologists noted that Ryan exhibited classic signs of obsessive thinking and anxiety. He had become increasingly withdrawn after Maddox's recovery from cancer, fixating on worst-case scenarios and potential dangers in daily life. Small inconveniences seemed magnified, financial pressures loomed disproportionately, and his sense of control over his family's well-being became increasingly rigid. One co-worker recalled Ryan saying, "If something happens to her, I couldn't live with myself." Those words, while superficially protective, foreshadowed the actions he would take. Investigators also found evidence of premeditation. His purchases of camping gear, food, and clothing were deliberate and carefully timed. Yet the psychological evaluation suggested a distorted perception of morality. Ryan believed that removing Maddox from her home environment was an act of protection. He rationalized that the consequences, however severe, were necessary. Experts later described this as a moral disconnection, where emotional attachment coexisted with cognitive distortion, allowing him to act in ways inconsistent with conventional understanding of parenthood. Family dynamics further complicated the picture. Ryan had maintained a close, almost symbiotic relationship with Morgan prior to Maddox's illness, often taking the lead in care decisions. After the medical crisis, however, subtle tensions emerged. Morgan's involvement in therapy appointments, discussions with doctors, and financial oversight clashed with Ryan's perceived authority, creating a sense of loss of control. In his confession, he hinted that he felt the pressure of responsibility had become unbearable. Behavioral analysts concluded that a combination of stress, obsession, and distorted reasoning created conditions where rational thinking was overridden by fear-driven decision-making. Forensic psychologists also examined his interactions during interrogation. Ryan demonstrated a capacity to articulate emotions, yet his empathy appeared selective. He expressed concern for Maddox's well-being in theoretical terms, yet failed to reconcile these feelings with the fatal consequences of his actions. Experts interpreted this as compartmentalization, a psychological mechanism that allows individuals to isolate certain thoughts from moral judgment, creating internal justification for harmful behavior. In addition to behavioral observations, digital evidence revealed obsessive monitoring of weather, travel routes, and emergency planning. These details aligned with the forensic assessment, indicating that his decision-making was highly structured, controlled, and deliberate, even as it culminated in tragedy. Psychologists concluded that Ryan's mind was not chaotic but methodical, making his actions both terrifying and incomprehensible. The case became a reference point for professionals studying parental filicide, obsessive thinking, and moral disengagement. Each layer of analysis revealed the complexity of the human mind, the coexistence of love, fear, and distorted logic. The forensic examination, combined with interviews and behavioral profiling, provided insight into how a parent could rationalize actions that ultimately led to the loss of a child. By the end of the week following Ryan's arrest, it was clear that the tragedy was not just an isolated act of violence. It was a window into the human psyche under extreme pressure, showing how perceived responsibility, fear, and cognitive distortion can converge with devastating consequences. The question lingered, could the signs have been recognized earlier? And if so, could this have been prevented? The trial of Ryan Lawrence began months after his arrest, with the nation watching closely. Prosecutors presented a detailed case, combining his own confession, digital and physical evidence, and forensic findings. Every purchase, every footprint, and every timeline element was laid out to show premeditation. Defense attorneys acknowledged the tragic loss but attempted to introduce arguments of mental instability, claiming that Ryan had been overwhelmed and acting under severe psychological stress. The court, however, weighed the facts against the narrative of rational planning, deliberate concealment, and the irreversible outcome of his actions. As the trial unfolded, testimony from investigators, psychologists, and family members provided a stark contrast between Ryan's public persona and the reality of his conduct. Detectives described the discovery of Maddox in the creek, the careful documentation of evidence, and the emotional toll of handling such a young child's death. Psychologists elaborated on the mental patterns identified in Ryan's behavior, obsessive thinking, moral disengagement, and compartmentalization that allowed him to rationalize harming the very person he claimed to love. Morgan Lawrence's testimony was composed yet heartrending, recounting her disbelief, grief, and the lingering questions about what could have been done differently. The sentencing reflected the severity of the crime. Ryan was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced accordingly. While justice in the courtroom offered some measure of closure, the emotional and psychological impact on Morgan, the community, and everyone involved in the investigation remained profound. Friends and neighbors spoke of a shattered sense of safety and trust, emphasizing that the repercussions of a single parent's actions ripple far beyond the immediate family. For Morgan, the aftermath was an ongoing journey of grief, reflection, and survival. She spoke publicly about the need to recognize warning signs in others and to support parents facing extreme stress, emphasizing mental health awareness and community support. Psychologists echoed this perspective, noting that early intervention and awareness of obsessive or distorted thinking patterns can be critical in preventing similar tragedies. Even years later, the case serves as a reference point in discussions of parental responsibility, forensic psychology, and the complexities of moral judgment under extreme pressure. Ryan's actions, while deliberate and calculated, also illuminate how distorted perception of protection, fear, and personal responsibility can converge with fatal consequences. Experts continue to analyze these dynamics, hoping to better understand and prevent such outcomes in the future. This case remains a solemn reminder that ordinary days can turn devastating, that the people we trust most can sometimes act in ways beyond comprehension, and that the intersection of love, fear, and distorted judgment can have irreversible results. The lessons extend beyond the courtroom, into parenting, community support, and mental health awareness, ensuring that Maddox's memory is honored by vigilance and understanding. If you've followed this story closely, take a moment to reflect on the fragility of life and the importance of recognizing the mental and emotional strain in those around you. Subscribe to our channel to stay informed about cases that examine the human condition, share this video with someone who values awareness and empathy, and consider joining our YouTube membership for access to extended interviews, behind-the-scenes investigation details, and exclusive content that helps us continue telling these stories responsibly. Because understanding these cases isn't just about facts, it's about learning from them, remembering those we've lost, and striving to prevent tragedy where possible.